My name is Evelyn Hart, and I've been a widow for just 3 weeks. My husband, Julian, passed away suddenly at least. That's what everyone believed. They said it was a heart attack, quick and painless. The funeral was small. My son, Michael, stood beside his wife, Adriana, who wept more loudly than anyone else. I remember watching her dab her eyes with a silk handkerchief and thinking how perfectly timed her tears were. That morning, the day everything began, I was standing in my driveway in Santa Barbara, holding my car keys, ready to drive to the law office for the will reading. Julian's estate was substantial, several properties, investments, the house we built together. I wasn't worried about money, but I was nervous about facing Adriana again. She had insisted on handling all of Julian's paperwork after his death, saying she wanted to help take care of family matters. It sounded sweet at the time, but now it made me uneasy. As I bent to open the car door, I heard someone shouting. A man came running down the street, waving his arms. He looked homeless, dirty jacket, tangled hair, eyes wide with panic. "Ma'am, don't start that car," he yelled. I froze. "What are you talking about?" He stumbled closer, panting. "Your daughter-in-law was here last night. I saw her. She was under the hood. She left something." For a second, I thought he was crazy, but then I noticed something odd. The hood latch was slightly open. My chest tightened. I handed him my phone and whispered, "Call 911. When the fire department arrived, one of the men carefully lifted the hood. His face changed instantly. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "someone cut your ignition wires and placed a plastic bag full of flammable material near the manifold. If you had started this car, it would have exploded." The world seemed to tilt. My knees buckled. That same morning I'd been thinking how proud Julian would be of me for keeping things together. And now this, someone wanted me gone. The officer asked if I could think of anyone who might wish me harm. I hesitated but finally said her name. Adriana Hart, my daughter-in-law. The officer wrote it down without looking surprised. That scared me even more. When they towed the car away for evidence, the man who'd warned me stood quietly by the gate. I asked his name. "People call me Skinny," he said, eyes lowering. "I sleep near the old bus stop. I just didn't want you to die." I pressed a few bills into his hand, but he refused. "Just stay alive, ma'am," he said before walking away. Inside my house, everything felt heavier: the photos, the furniture, even the air. I sat on the couch and stared at Julian's portrait. He had trusted everyone, even Adriana. She was charming, ambitious, and always smiling. But beneath that, I had sensed something cold. Julian once joked she could talk her way through a hurricane. He never saw she was the storm. That night I didn't sleep. I replayed every detail from the past few months: Julian's sudden illness, Adriana's insistence on handling his medication, her whispers to the lawyer, and her push for cremation immediately after his death. One pattern kept emerging: control. She wanted it all: money, property, and maybe my silence. By sunrise, my fear had turned into something sharper. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and wrote one sentence on a piece of paper: "Find out why." It wasn't anger that guided me, it was survival. Tomorrow, at the will reading, I'd look Adriana in the eye. And I'd know whether she wanted to destroy me, or if she already had. The next morning, I arrived at the law firm downtown. The sign above the entrance read Solis Green, and my heart skipped. I'd met George Solis once, years ago. He was Julian's corporate lawyer, smooth, confident, the kind of man who never smiled unless there was money on the table. It struck me as strange that he, of all people, was handling Julian's personal will. The waiting room smelled faintly of lemon polish and old paper. Adriana was already there, dressed in a navy blue suit, a pearl necklace gleaming against her collarbone. She stood when she saw me, her mouth slightly open. For a second, her face drained of color before she forced a smile. "Mother Hart," she said softly, "I didn't expect you so early." Her voice trembled just enough to reveal fear, not grief. Michael looked up from his phone, surprised. "Mom, you came alone? You should have called me." I gave him a small smile. "I'm fine, sweetheart." Inside the conference room, George Solis greeted us with rehearsed sympathy. "Miss Hart, my condolences again. Julian was a great man." I nodded, taking my seat. Adriana sat across from me, crossing her legs, her diamond bracelet catching the light. George opened a thick folder and began reading the official document. "Julian Hart's last will and testament," he started. The first few items were predictable: charitable donations, small gifts to old friends, the retirement fund. Then came the main section. To my beloved wife, Evelyn Hart, I leave our primary residence at Ocean View Drive and all joint savings accounts. I exhaled quietly, but the next line made my blood run cold. To my daughter-in-law, Adriana Hart, I leave ownership of Hart Logistics, the Palm Street property, and the lake house in Tahoe. I looked up sharply. Excuse me? George cleared his throat. These additions were part of a revised will, signed 3 months before Mr. Hart's passing. Julian never mentioned that, I said. Adriana spoke before he could answer. He told me he wanted me to manage things while Michael focused on his work. He trusted me. Her tone was calm, but her eyes darted toward mine. I saw triumph flicker there. Michael frowned. Mom, Dad told me he was planning to move the company back under the family trust. Not this. Adriana reached for his hand. Honey, your father and I discussed it. You must remember. He said he wanted continuity. But her fingers trembled. The rest of the meeting blurred into background noise, the signatures, the notarized seals, the lawyer's closing remarks. When we stood to leave, Adriana lingered near the door. She leaned close and whispered, You shouldn't have come today, Evelyn. Her perfume was strong, sharp, and familiar, the same scent that lingered near the car the night before. My stomach turned. Outside, the wind from the ocean carried a chill. I watched her walk toward her black sedan, heels clicking on the pavement, Michael following behind, looking confused and hurt. I realized then that she had already tightened her hold on him, weaving her lies like silk threads around his heart. As I stood by the curb, George Solis stepped out of the building, adjusting his tie. He didn't notice me watching as he got into the passenger seat of Adriana's car. My breath caught. It wasn't grief that filled me now, it was clarity. Julian might have signed that will, but I was starting to believe he never lived long enough to understand what he was signing. And I wasn't about to let his legacy be stolen by the woman who nearly killed me. Over the next few days, whispers began to follow me everywhere I went. In the grocery store, at church, even at the park. People spoke softly when I passed, pretending not to look. I knew what they were saying. Adriana had made sure of it. That I was losing my mind. That grief had twisted my thoughts. That I was imagining enemies where there were none. But rumors didn't frighten me anymore. They motivated me. One afternoon, while sorting Julian's old papers, I noticed a statement from a joint account I had never seen before. The balance was almost empty, but the withdrawal history caught my eye. Large sums taken out right before and after Julian's death. Each transaction was signed by both Julian and Adriana. My husband's signature looked familiar, but something about it felt wrong. I tucked the statement into my purse and drove to the bank. The manager, an old friend of Julian's, frowned as he looked over the documents. Mrs. Hart, he said quietly, Julian never visited us in person after his hospitalization. All transfers were authorized through fax signatures sent by Miss Adriana Hart. The room tilted again, but this time I steadied myself. Could I have a copy of those faxes? He hesitated, then slid me a folder. I shouldn't, but Julian was like family. At home, I spread the pages across the dining table. The signatures weren't just slightly off, they were mechanical, printed, traced. Adriana had been forging his name while he was dying. That night, my phone rang. The voice on the other end was calm, measured. Mrs. Hart, this is Dr. Vargas. I treated your husband in his final weeks. May we speak privately? We met the next morning at a small cafe near the hospital. He looked uneasy, glancing over his shoulder before lowering his voice. There were abnormalities in your husband's blood work, he said. His potassium levels were abnormally high, but the nurse reported that his medication had been altered. Altered? I whispered. He nodded. The dosage in the bottles didn't match what I prescribed. Someone tampered with them. The coffee turned bitter in my mouth. Why didn't you report it? I asked. I tried, he said. But Miss Adriana Hart requested immediate cremation before we could authorize a toxicology test. She said it was Julian's wish. I felt my hands shake under the table. That wasn't his wish, I said softly. Dr. Vargas sighed. I thought you should know. Whatever happened, it wasn't natural. When I returned home, the house felt too quiet, too watchful. I stood in the hallway where Julian's voice once echoed, where Adriana had laughed so easily. Everything about her, the timing, the control, the perfection, now pointed to one terrifying truth. She hadn't just wanted his money. She wanted the world to believe his death was merciful and my suspicions were madness. But she had made one mistake. She left a trail, and I was going to follow it. As the sun set, I wrote another line beneath the first note on my kitchen table. Find out how. Fear was gone now, only purpose remained. The next morning I returned to the garage where my car had been examined. The mechanic, a kind man named Sam, greeted me with a grave expression. "Miss Hart," he said, "we finished analyzing what was under your hood. Whoever did this wasn't guessing, they knew exactly what they were doing." He showed me photos taken before the evidence was turned over to the police. The ignition cable was sliced cleanly, the flammable substance placed in a small heat-resistant bag right next to the manifold. If the engine had reached temperature, Sam said, the bag would have ruptured. The fumes alone could have killed you before the explosion. I thanked him quietly, my hands trembling as I took the printed images. They were more than evidence, they were a message. Someone had intended for me to burn, unseen, unmissed. As I stepped outside, I saw a figure sitting near the alley wall. It was the man who had saved me Skinny. He stood when he saw me, clutching a worn cap in his hands. "I didn't mean to scare you that day," he said softly. "You saved my life," I replied. "That's something I won't forget." He hesitated before adding, "The night before it happened, I saw her again. Your daughter-in-law. She was with a man, fancy suit, silver tie clip. They parked near the fence. I heard him say, 'Make sure she starts it herself. No witnesses.'" My chest tightened. "Did you recognize him?" He shook his head. Only that he drove a black Lexus and spoke like someone who owned everything he touched. That description alone was enough. I knew it had to be George Solis. The moment I got home, I called an old friend of Julian's, a retired detective named Robert Sedano. He had worked private investigations for years and owed Julian a favor. When I told him what had happened, there was a long pause on the line. "Evelyn," he finally said, "don't talk to the police again until I look into this. If she's tied to that lawyer, we'll need to be careful." Within a week, Robert had collected more than I expected. Adriana's real name had once been Adrienne Crosswell. She had changed it after being charged with financial fraud in Arizona 10 years earlier. The case was dropped when her partner disappeared. That partner's name? George Solis. Robert also confirmed what I feared most: the signature on Julian's will was forged. A handwriting analyst compared it to Julian's letters and found clear inconsistencies. I stared at the report for a long time, the edges of the paper cutting into my palms. My husband hadn't given her anything. She had stolen everything, even his last words. That night I stood on the porch, watching the ocean shimmer in the distance. The world was quiet, but my mind was not. For the first time since Julian's death, I felt something close to control. It was time to stop surviving and start fighting back. Robert arrived early one morning with 2 cups of coffee and a plan. He placed a small envelope on my kitchen table. Inside were 3 miniature cameras and 2 voice recorders. "We'll need her to talk," he said. "If she admits even part of it, we'll have everything." I stared at the devices, both terrified and relieved. "She'll never confess outright." "She doesn't have to," Robert replied. "People like Adriana always think they're smarter than everyone else. All we need to do is let her prove it." That afternoon, I called my son. My voice was soft, steady. "Michael, could you and Adriana come over for dinner tomorrow? I'd like to talk about the family business, maybe smooth things over." He hesitated, then agreed. I could almost hear Adriana whispering behind him. The next day, I spent hours preparing the house. The table was set, candles flickered, and the cameras were discreetly placed, one in the bookshelf, one near the clock, and one above the wine cabinet. I practiced smiling in the mirror, steady but not forced. Julian had always said I could calm a storm with my voice. I hoped that was still true. When the doorbell rang, I felt my pulse in my throat. Michael entered first, holding flowers. Adriana followed, her usual flawless smile in place. "Lovely evening," she said, her tone dripping with sweetness. "Yes," I answered, "perfect for honest conversations." Dinner began politely enough. We talked about business, about the weather, about nothing. But tension hung between us like smoke. Robert was parked down the street, listening to the recording feed in real time. Halfway through the meal, I turned the conversation. "Julian trusted you, Adriana," I said gently. "He always said you had a gift for organization." She smiled, tilting her head. "I did what I could." "He also mentioned how much he relied on you near the end, his medicine, the paperwork, even the will." Her eyes narrowed. "Why do you bring that up now?" I leaned forward slightly. Because someone tried to kill me the morning of the will reading. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you? The fork slipped from her hand and clattered onto the plate. Michael looked between us, confused. Mom, what are you saying? Ask your wife, I said softly. Adriana recovered quickly, laughing. You can't be serious. Are you accusing me of something so insane? I reached into my purse and placed a photo on the table. Adriana and George Solis, standing beside her black Lexus late at night. That's you, isn't it? Her breath caught. Where did you get that? From someone who saw you near my garage, the night before the car explosion. Michael stood, stunned. Adriana? She rose too, eyes blazing. This is ridiculous. You think I'd risk everything for some old woman's money? Old woman, I echoed quietly. Funny choice of words for someone who just inherited half my husband's estate. Her mask cracked. He wanted me to have it. He was tired of taking care of you, tired of pretending. The words slipped out before she could stop them. Her voice grew louder, trembling with fury. Your husband loved me, not you. I gave him what he needed, and I was supposed to have everything. Michael froze. What are you talking about? Adriana turned to him, desperate now. She's twisting everything. She's trying to destroy me. But I didn't respond. I simply pushed another folder across the table, the handwriting analysis, the bank records, the proof of her name change. Her face went pale. She grabbed the wine glass and hurled it against the wall, the red liquid splattering like blood across the white paint. You think this will stop me? She shouted. You think you can take back what's mine? Then she lunged toward me, the glint of a knife flashing from her purse. Michael screamed her name, but before she reached me, the front door burst open. Police, drop it! Officers swarmed in, followed by Robert, holding the recording device. Adriana froze, eyes wide, realizing the truth too late. Every word had been recorded. As they handcuffed her, she turned to me, voice shaking with rage. You set me up. I met her gaze steadily. No, Adriana, you set yourself up the moment you decided I was disposable. Michael stood motionless, tears in his eyes as they led her away. The silence that followed was heavy, but it wasn't grief, it was relief. Robert placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. You did it, he said quietly. I nodded. No, I whispered. I just finished what Julian started. Outside, the flashing lights painted the night sky red and blue. For the first time in months, I could breathe. The storm was over, or at least the worst of it was. The trial began 2 months later. I sat quietly in the front row of the courtroom, my hands clasped together as Adriana entered, dressed in beige prison clothes instead of her usual designer suits. George Solis followed, pale and sweating, his arrogance stripped away. Neither of them looked at me. The evidence spoke louder than I ever could. The recordings, the forged documents, the bank transfers, and the mechanic's testimony. Robert sat beside me, his notepad open, though there was nothing left to write. Everything we'd fought for was unfolding exactly as it should. The prosecution called witness after witness. When Dr. Vargas took the stand, his voice was calm but firm. He confirmed the altered medication, the false cremation request, and the suspicious blood results. Each word was a nail in the coffin of their lies. When the verdict came, the courtroom was silent. Adriana was sentenced to 18 years for fraud, forgery, and attempted murder. George received 15 for his role in the conspiracy. Adriana turned once, her eyes empty, searching for sympathy. She found none. I didn't feel triumph, just peace. For the first time in a long while, I could breathe without fear. Afterward, Michael approached me in tears. "Mom," he said, "I don't know how I couldn't see it." I took his hands. "Because you loved her," I said softly. "And love blinds us all, until it hurts too much to ignore." We began rebuilding slowly. I restored the family trust and created a scholarship in Julian's name for young law students. The house no longer felt haunted, it felt earned. I even visited Skinny, the man who saved me, at the shelter. I gave him a warm jacket and a small envelope of money. He tried to refuse again, but this time I insisted. "You changed everything," I told him. "You deserve a new start too." Weeks later, while cleaning Julian's old study, I found an envelope tucked inside his favorite book. It held a note written in his familiar, careful handwriting. "If something happens to me, don't give up, Eve. You've always been stronger than you think." I pressed the letter to my heart, tears slipping down my cheeks. For the first time, they weren't tears of sorrow, they were of gratitude. Julian had believed in me, even from beyond the grave. Justice had been served, but more than that, truth had survived. If you've stayed with me through this story, I want you to take one truth from it: never doubt what your instincts are trying to tell you. The quiet warnings, the sleepless nights, the uneasy feeling in your chest, they exist for a reason. I ignored mine for too long, trusting charm over character, politeness over honesty, and it nearly cost me my life. We live in a world where betrayal often hides behind perfect smiles. Sometimes it's not strangers who break us, it's the people who share our table, our name, our blood. But what defines us isn't the pain they cause, it's what we do after. Whether you're 68 or 38, you are never too old to fight for yourself, to rebuild, to protect what's yours. I learned that revenge doesn't always mean destruction. For me, it meant truth. It meant standing up in the same room where I was once made to feel small and saying, "You can't take any more from me." And when justice came, I didn't feel hate, I felt freedom. So if you're watching this and you've been betrayed, lied to, or silenced, hear me now. You are not weak for surviving, you are strong for still being here. Like this video if it reminded you of your own strength. Share it with someone who might need that reminder tonight. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I want to know how far stories like this can travel. Because maybe somewhere out there, another woman is standing at the edge of her storm, wondering if she can face it. You can. Because true wealth isn't what you own, it's what you refuse to let anyone take from you. And that, my dear listener, is the real art of revenge.